It is fantastic to be back on the stage here in Abu Dhabi after many years away. And we are in, as Anna Palacio just said, the most important session of the whole event. I'm not claiming it, Anna Palacio is. And so we have a distinguished group of panelists here to talk about hydrogen and what's next for hydrogen. I think Anna framed the conversation perfectly when she said she walked in and asked the panelists, what's realistic, what are the timelines, what kind of financing do we need to make this happen, and what can it really solve? So I hope that we can address Anna's questions during this session. Let me introduce quickly the panelists, and then we'll get started. So first we have Meg Gentle, who is the Executive Director of High Impact Fuels and a board member of the Atlantic Council. We have Shuayb Ismail, the Associate Partner and Head of Partnerships at Xynteo, which is a sponsor here today. We have Hussein Fouad Ghazzawy, the Senior Energy and Industry Consultant at LYNX. And then Joe Webster, a Senior Fellow at the Global Energy Center, who is the Global Energy Center's lead on hydrogen and offshore wind. So what we want to do, we want to have a very interactive conversation. So if you have questions throughout, I'm not going to do sort of moderated session and then Q&A. If we have questions throughout, raise your hand. Let's make this a dialogue, make this a real conversation. So if somebody says anything and you want clarification, just raise your hand, we'll call on you. We will make sure that this is something that you are all very engaged in. But I want to get started first with Meg. And Meg, I want to know if you can tell us about what HIF is doing in Chile and in Texas, and how you see the role for hydrogen developing over the next few years.
Thank you, Randy, and thanks for everyone coming to the most important panel of the day.
Most important panel of the day.
So HIF Global is a hydrogen company, an e-fuels company, a decarbonization company, and we actually just last month brought online our demonstration facility in southern Chile. So it sits right on the Straits of Magellan, where the wind is the very best resource in the world. And it is producing methanol from hydrogen by taking hydrogen and captured carbon dioxide. When you reattach the hydrogen and the carbon dioxide, you have hydrocarbon again. And these are e-fuels or electrofuels, meaning they're fuels that are drop-in. They can be used in cars and ships, that are in use today without any changes to the engines. But they're originated from electricity rather than being originated from fossil fuel. So the plant in Chile loaded e-fuel, e-gasoline into a Porsche 911 on December 20th and drove around the wind turbine and drove away. So it's happening. It's not an idea. It's not a plan for the future. E-fuels are available now. And we'll expand the plant in Chile. We have actually a really ambitious plan in Chile and about 500,000 acres to put the wind farm. And we'll ultimately have about 12 gigawatts of wind electricity there that we convert into a liquid fuel so it can go on a ship and be delivered probably into markets in Europe initially. And following that general footprint with a facility in Texas that we're now starting the advanced engineering for that plant. It'll be a 2 gigawatt facility, and we're planning to start construction on it next year. And that'll actually be our first commercial size plant. So when we talk about timeline, it's about a 3-year construction timeline. So we've got maybe 4 years until we're producing at size. And it will produce about 200 million gallons a year of e-methanol and e-gasoline, and about 300,000 kilograms, so 0.3 million tons of hydrogen that will be used as the feedstock to make the e-fuels. So by early 2027, we'll have a mid-size refinery, 12 to 14,000 barrels a day of e-fuels produced in Texas. And then the commercial scale facilities will follow in Chile. And we're looking for sites in other places in the world.
Fantastic. I want to come back to the economics of this in a little bit when we talk about this. But just one follow-on question is when you're at scale, where do you see the biggest markets for e-fuels? What are you looking at? Is it ground transportation? Is it aviation, ship? Where do you ultimately see that market going?
So as you would imagine, and we'll talk about cost later, but we need markets where there is some carbon pricing so that we can price the benefit of this being a carbon neutral fuel. And so naturally, Europe is most advanced on carbon pricing. Within the US, California actually has some carbon pricing with the low carbon fuel standard. That may expand as we're in construction. Other states in the US may adopt that. And eventually, we're expecting to see carbon markets forming in Asia, either by policy or by direction of the big energy ministries like METI and other places that start to prioritize sustainable fuels.
Got it. Thank you. Let's move on to Shuayb. Shuayb, you've been working in India on a number of projects. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about in India and how the market in India is set to evolve.
Yeah. Firstly, Meg, the work that you're doing is fantastic. And I always forget to tell you this. If you ever want anyone to come and test drive the Porsche, I'm more than happy.
I'm above you on the list.
This is a
I've known Meg
theme,
longer.
common theme.
We can provide other cars as well, but we're always happy to help for climate change, of course. Xynteo works not just in India. We work across Europe, across the Middle East. Our focus is on finding bankable, commercially viable projects that will tangibly move the needle in climate change, in economic development, and in energy security today. And this is in direct answer to your question pre-session, Anna. So in India, we're seeing a lot of movement towards hydrogen, but then also a very big gap in the market at the same time. So the movement in hydrogen is there's circa $5 billion that have already been plowed into developing hydrogen projects from major family groups. There's a lot of investment that's coming in from technology offices all over the world. India accounts for about $7 billion as a hydrogen economy today. It's expected to grow at 14% CAGR through to 2050 to be $340 billion as a hydrogen economy, one of the world's major hydrogen exporters, and critically, from about 5% of demand today to 20% of demand by middle of the century. So India is growing from the borders of the hydrogen world to what really is going to be at the center of the hydrogen world. And so there's a lot of investment that's going in to try and figure out how do we domesticize this industry.
Hydrogen of which origin, gray or in pink?
So today, India produces, for everyone's benefit, the question that was just asked was what color hydrogen is being produced in India? The forecast is by 2050, 25% may be blue hydrogen, 75% will be green hydrogen. Today, 5 million tons is produced gray, steam methane reforming, primarily moving towards refining industries or fertilizers, ammonia. The most interesting thing that's happening in India, though, is where the potential comes to prove large-scale hydrogen ecosystems today. So we've done a number of projects in India. One of the projects that we wrapped up mid last year was working with a number of different players. One of them, the largest, we can't say the name, of course, but one of the largest steel companies in the world, who were looking at how are they going to double their steel capacity by 2030, quintuple it by 2050. Right? So steel is one of the world's major emitters of emissions, primarily because you use coal as a reductant in most steel mills around the world. And so what they were trying to figure out is, in their minds, they had a choice. Either we grow our steel industry, maintain our market share, but also quintuple our emissions, or we don't grow, keep our emissions low and hopefully try to lower them further, but then we lose that commercial viability. And so what we helped them figure out is actually they could use green hydrogen today, modeled out, electrolyzers brought in from Europe, to achieve not just an on-par return with using coal with their BAU operations, but a 10 to 26% greater return. So when we look at hydrogen use cases that are viable our key message is they're viable today. There are certain ingredients you have to have, and we can talk about these later, to make the ecosystem work, to make it cost viable. But hydrogen is not a fuel for the future. For industries like steel, where you're investing $1 billion for 1 million tons of steel, 2050 isn't 30 years away. They're making their investment decisions today. So we have to make this work today. And that's what we're seeing proven in India, and hopefully, proven in India, proven in Europe, and then hopefully exportable around the world.
Fantastic. I want to come back to the economics on that because that's fascinating. But let's next go on to Hussein, who has been working on hydrogen projects in Egypt. And I think what's great about this panel in particular is that you often have a hydrogen conversation that is Europe and the US and then maybe the Gulf. But we're actually here bringing in India and Egypt and other parts of the world to the conversation. I think is really important that we think about hydrogen as a global commodity. So Hussein.
For the hydrogen in Egypt, and I will be very careful with the colors as well to make you guys happy. As a follow-up of the COP27, which I'm sure some of you must have attended. Actually, there is a lot of MOUs project already been in place, but actually, Egypt during the COP27 commercialized the first green hydrogen project, which actually took 10 months to be built, using 100 megawatt from electrolysis from the 250, 260 megawatt renewable energy. So it's a pure green hydrogen. It will produce about 15,000 tons per year of green hydrogen, which translated to 90,000 tons of green ammonia. Something of interest, maybe a lot of people don't know, but actually we used to have a fertilizer plant, Kima in Aswan, was built in 50s, and we was using the electrolysis and electricity from the high dam. So actually we had the green ammonia, it's closed in 2019, but we had it in the, we all know. We studied in the school the electrolysis, how you separate the hydrogen from the oxygen. So we had that. As far as Egypt is concerned, and Dr. Sultan actually was talking about it yesterday, with what Masdar is doing, investing $100 billion, 50 already spent and 50 yet to be spent. There is a major project already being signed in Egypt in November between Masdar and Egypt to have a 10 gigawatt wind farm, which will be one of the biggest in the world. And this 10 gigawatt wind farm will produce about 48,000 of kilowatt hour of electricity per year. And another project also Masdar and Egypt as well is having 2 gigawatts, so in total 4 gigawatts. One in Ain Sokhna on the Suez Canal, and one on the Mediterranean, and actually we'll have out of that about 500,000 tons of green hydrogen, which will be translated to about 2.3 million tons of green ammonia. Egypt, with its geographical position, and we have the Suez Canal, where 12% of the world trade crossing every year. It's a good opportunity to build on what Meg said. There is also a project for e-methanol as well, which will be giving that green fuel to the vessel crossing the canal. We'll have one at the south, one at the north. So that's actually where the Suez Canal Economic Zone are focusing on going that. Fertilizer industry in Egypt is big. Egypt is the 6th producer worldwide of the ammonia, and actually 5th exporter worldwide of the ammonia. Actually, with what happened with the Ukraine crisis, Egypt compensated partially for the fertilizer to Europe was coming from Russia. So again, all this gray hydrogen we are producing now with the fertilizer, that's a fantastic or a good example to change to blue hydrogen by capture the CO2, so that's an actual and good potential. We are a natural gas producing country, and I'll go back again, sorry, to this 10 gigawatt wind. It will basically save the country $5 billion per year and 9% of the CO2 emission when it's commercialized. So the gas will be free. We can use it. We have 2 big LNG facilities on the Mediterranean. And again, good example of collaboration. We have the gas coming from Israel to this LNG facility because Israel doesn't have the LNG facility. Use that, send it to Europe. So actually, there is 171 increase of the LNG export this year in Egypt because of the collaboration between all this country in this area to react basically with the dynamic. So we spoke about fertilizer. Steel industry is big as well, and that's another example where we can. But the fertilizer, I think it's a clear pathway where Egypt can convert the gray to the blue hydrogen. We spoke about the e-methanol for feeding the vessels through the Suez Canal, because of course we all know that transportation is significant contribution to the CO2 emission. In total, it's a big number, $85 billion of MOUs and projects being signed from early 21 till now. We hope some of this definitely materialize soon. We have very aggressive plan when it comes to green hydrogen. Egypt is building a dedicated green corridor for the renewable energy, because our objective is to reach 42% by 2035. So that green corridor is dedicated to the renewable, and with the proximity to Europe, Asia, and of course Africa, definitely it's well positioned to feed that global network with the renewable energy.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think it's really, really important that you're focusing on green ammonia for fertilizer.
Absolutely.
The current gray hydrogen market is something like 94, 95 million tons a year.
Correct.
And most of the clean hydrogen conversation seems to revolve around sort of new uses of hydrogen, transportation, steel, but we have this big bogey of 94 million tons of hydrogen that needs to be decarbonized right now, and so there's already this potential market. And so that you're working on decarbonizing that market, I think, is really important. And I want to come back at some point to this sort of end-use conversation. But before then, I want to go to Joe. Joe, we've heard from a bunch of companies. You're here as the analyst, and I want to talk about what you expect to see in hydrogen from 2023. There's been lots of talk over the past 2 or 3 years. Projects are starting to get developed, but with the IRA and other incentives getting put in place around the world, do you think that in 2023 we will see an acceleration of projects?
Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so with regards to, so let me just give a little bit of background about myself and the LYNX Council. So we're obviously a think tank, nonprofit think tank that advocates for the public interest with a specific focus on transatlantic relations. So I'm a senior fellow there, and I lead our offshore wind as well as hydrogen efforts. And with regards to what we see in 2023, so maybe it's kind of good to take a step back and talk about what happened in 2022, which was, I think, a very important year for hydrogen. And talking from the U.S. perspective, the Inflation Reduction Act obviously was a game changer for the U.S. hydrogen industry. So, when we talk about, I think it's also important to kind of level set and talk about, So sorry, excuse me. Yeah, it's important. It's important to level set and talk about what's been happening with hydrogen. So with the Inflation Reduction Act, we had up to $3 production tax credit for hydrogen. Which is not the only portion of this. So there's fiscal support at the mining manufacturing. There is support for generation, for solar, for wind, and then finally there's a hydrogen production tax credit. So it's for green hydrogen, there's fiscal support embedded throughout the entire supply chain. So that's very impactful. There's also a 45E, 45Q credit, which provides support which are not stackable, so you cannot get credit for both for carbon capture as well as for the hydrogen production tax credit. But there's also additional support for blue hydrogen. So that's obviously a huge step for the United States, which has traditionally lagged Europe on decarbonization. So I think we need to talk about 2022. But with regards to 2023 and the next step for hydrogen, so I think frankly there's a lot of I think there's a lot of uncertainty. So there's still implementation. There's some important implementation issues for hydrogen. First, in the United States, being matching. So this is an issue in Europe as well. If there's hourly, if there's annual matching, and that will obviously impact not only the cost of hydrogen, but also the potential emissions of hydrogen. So if you're getting emissions directly if you're getting electricity directly from the grid, that can be more emissions intensive. And so I think that's a very evolving debate, and we don't know the answers to that. And keeping on the theme of uncertainty for 2023. I think, frankly, just to caveat, I'm not a technical expert, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer. The folks I talk with who are experts, who are technical experts, they don't necessarily agree on important topics in hydrogen. So, picking one, for example, aviation decarbonization. Are we going to move to liquefied hydrogen or ammonia or some other fuel? And frankly, there's still uncertainty about that. That debate is not resolved at a technical level. And I think that's true across a lot of other hydrogen issues. So I think it's important to keep humility about where we are in hydrogen. So is this going to be, there's going to be a lot of issues I think we're not going to get resolved in 2023. But I think we just need to be humble about 2023 and keep moving forward in that direction. Thank you.
Joe, thanks. And Meg, the matching issue is something that you've raised a lot. I'd love to hear from you on that topic in particular, because there is a sense that there are things that we need to resolve. The policy framework isn't done yet. And so maybe we can pivot to that topic in general, but I'd love to hear specifically your thoughts on in the U.S. Matching renewable power.
Sure, and so what Randy is talking about when he says matching, and some people call it temporal correlation, is how closely you have to match your renewable power when it generated its electrons to when you used electrons, if you're connecting to the grid, to make your hydrogen. And if we take Texas as the real example, in Texas, the wind capacity factor generally is about 40% capacity factor. So the wind is blowing 40% of the time. And if we had to build the plant directly attached to the wind farm and only use the electricity 40% of the time, that would mean that the e-fuels plant was only running 40% of the time. And as you would imagine, that would essentially kill the economics of the plant, or make the e-fuels so expensive that nobody would ever buy them. And so one way we get the power cost down is to build enough wind capacity so that over a period of time, all of the electrons that we need, and for our facility that's 2 gigawatts of power, it will be able to be generated by the 5 gigawatts of wind capacity, but we will connect to the grid so that we are actually buying 2 gigawatts of baseload power. So the regulation is going to be important, whether that is allowed and considered green hydrogen. If you're over a month or a quarter or a year generating 2 gigawatts of total wind power and consuming 2 gigawatts of power off the grid, or if the rule is that you have to match hour to hour, so you're only considered green for the exact hour that the wind park is generating electricity. And this is a question in Europe, and actually the Commission, I guess, has guided that they will require hourly temporal correlation, which would, impair the ability of to import these e-fuels from the United States. It would still be able to import from the Chilean plant because we'll be only using the wind park in Chile. There's no grid. And in the US, this is a question that has been posed for the calculation of the hydrogen production tax credit, and we expect that the temporal correlation requirement will be much, much longer than hourly.
Got it. We've got a question right there. And the microphone is coming, so hold on 1 second. There you go.
Perhaps a little too eager there. Rob Bloom from the Carbon Trust in the UK. Your point there on a typical kind of, another term for that is additionality, which is often brought up in the European Commission kind of conversations. To what extent do you see hydrogen storage being essential in kind of allowing you to get closer to that, really, really green hydrogen? Because, you can oversize perhaps your renewables. Is there an alternative in perhaps sizing storage mechanisms for hydrogen so that you can always ensure that they're matching with those renewables?
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned additionality, because additionality, the requirement that you are not using existing renewable power, but which could be used for something else, right? So you're kind of building a new plant and then sort of stealing the renewable power from another use. But instead you have a requirement to build additional renewable power capacity. And that, is very logical, that additional capacity has to be built. And in the case of the Texas plant, we won't be the power builder. We'll contract for power under PPA for, round numbers, 5 gigawatts of renewable power capacity, so that when it runs 40% of the time, we have 2 gigawatts of power for the plant. And so that will meet the additionality requirement. The question still then being the matching or the temporal correlation. And so that's really important that those are two, different concepts, but like you mentioned, sometimes they get put together and called one thing. And to your second question embedded in there was about the hydrogen storage. And so yes, we can build hydrogen storage, but it's important to consider whether the hydrogen is stored as a gas or you have to store it as a liquid to get the volume down. And just keeping in mind that to liquefy hydrogen, you have to bring it to negative 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which takes energy then to make it into a liquid. So practically speaking, the storage ability for the hydrogen is more limited than you would think. We'll just store hydrogen. So there's some hydrogen storage that we could do, but probably not for the full amount.
Got it. Meg, thanks. I'd love to keep addressing policy questions right now and what policy questions we need to have resolved in 2023. So Shuayb, what is your top policy issue for 2023 that you're worried about?
Oh, top one.
You can do 3 or 5, or we have 20 more minutes. We could just talk policy.
So maybe let me take a step back. Let me talk about why we got involved in hydrogen,
okay,
and why policy for us isn't something we like to talk about too much,
yeah.
But we'll explain it. So Xynteo is an eclectic mix of fund managers, investment bankers, engineers, strategy consultants, et cetera, from some of the largest firms in the world, who all left because we wanted to do what we used to do for profit for impact. And that's why we try and find hard problems, industry-focused problems, and try and solve them. And then our hope is other people get inspired and then just go and replicate it elsewhere. And so one of the things that we truly believe is that industry has to be the driver for the energy transition, has to be the driver to solve climate change, and government's an enabler. Finance is also an enabler. Industry has to lead the way forward. So in all the work that we do, we always look at policy, but we always design our ecosystems to presume no policy change happens. So the work that we did in India, for example, that I was referencing earlier, we identified a whole range of different policy challenges. We came up with 27 different policies to address them. We spoke to government, et cetera, but our baseline case, that 12 to 26% increase on return versus carbon emissions presumed no carbon pricing, presumed no policy support whatsoever. And that's one of the key ingredients for designing these good, strong business cases. Presume government's not going to be able to help. Government has enough challenges that it has to be dealing with, and there is a way to do that. If government does help, though, then one of the biggest things that government can do is to help lower the price of renewable electricity. It was one of the remarks that were made, I think, yesterday. If you're just looking at production costs, if we pivot slightly into the cost conversation, if you're just looking at production costs for hydrogen, 60 to 80% of your cost is renewable electricity. So when you're looking to reduce the price of hydrogen, what you're really looking to do is to reduce the price of renewable electricity. If you're looking to look at the trend, production cost trend for hydrogen, you're really looking at the price trend for renewable electricity within whatever region or locale you're looking at. So lowering transmission costs, lowering other forms of prices and levies that are imposed on electricity transmission, incentivizing more electricity production and supply within the country, paired with storage, really importantly, is critical. That is probably the #1 policy area I'd recommend.
Got it? Hussein, what are your thoughts?
I just want to wear Africa hat for a minute, if you allow
Absolutely.
me. The recent, European Investment Bank report, Africa has the potential to produce 50 million tons of green hydrogen. And there are 3 areas: north, where is Egypt, west Morocco, Mauritania, and south Namibia and South Africa. So the potential is there. In Africa, we have a serious issue when it comes to infrastructure. And if you allow me to use the example of electricity in Egypt, in 2014, we had the blackout. We're producing 24 gigawatt of electricity. From 2014 till 2021, we added about 35 gigawatt. We have a production capacity of 59.5. And guess what? Where other countries need electricity, neighbor countries, we cannot give them what they want because the lack of infrastructure. So back to your comment. We have issues with policies in the emerging markets, fine, emerging countries, and that's we're learning as we're developing. Africa needs a lot of investment. I mean, in some of the panel I heard in the morning, can be the future of the renewable energy for the entire world. But to do that, you need to build an infrastructure. Since I've been born, we were hearing about Cairo-Cape Town road. It never happened, and then it's still all this trans-African roads, east to west, north to south. We have a serious problem with that. So I'm using this platform to encourage people, put your money in Africa. Secretary Kerry said it this morning. Give a concession when it comes to funding. We still have 580 million African in sub-Sahara with no electricity, 900 million without clean gas. So definitely we have issues, but also we have the potential, the minerals. I mean, we heard it in Amos talks, fantastic talks, and I'm glad actually the world now is thinking ahead. We don't have to wait for the crisis to happen to react. And again, it's the way he said, it's not US against China. It's for the benefit of the entire world to have all these rare minerals available and the process to produce for everybody. So again, actually in the Egypt low carbon hydrogen policy, which was announced during the coup, we have 2 models, and the green model, we can actually produce up to 8% of this 95 million tons required. We still have a challenge, and I'll talk specifically about Egypt, about the policy still going on. I think the Green Corridor will help in the matching stories. So it's a step. We are not there yet, but definitely work on progress.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah.
I want to add something on to
Please.
Hussein's comment without scaring the audience. Firstly, a Cairo to Cape Town road would be an epic road trip that I would happily go on, maybe with
the Porsche?
Maybe with the Porsche. One of the things that I would emphasize is, I was talking about production cost earlier, right? If you're just looking at production cost, 60 to 80% of your cost is just renewable electricity. If you're looking end to end, and your distance for transporting the hydrogen is over 100 kilometers, transport becomes 60 to 80% of your cost and growing even higher. So when we're talking about Africa's potential, and I'm a strong, strong believer that Africa has the potential to power the world, we're not just talking about building infrastructure in Africa for renewable electricity, for transmission networks, for hydrogen production. We need to lower that transport cost, and so co-locate the consumption sectors next to the hydrogen production as well. So the world, certain regions of the world are going to be growing in steel demand. Africa is one of them. We should not be looking at Africa, we should no longer be looking at Africa as an export market of commodities. We should be looking at Africa as an industrial house of the world, where we'll produce the hydrogen in Africa, produce the steel co-located in Africa, and then export steel products.
Right.
So the infrastructure development needs to be both upstream and downstream.
Agreed.
That's how we solve this crisis and
Agreed.
make the most of Africa.
And the transportation issue, for those who don't know, it's very similar to the storage issue that Meg raised, that hydrogen is not particularly volumetrically dense. So it's very, very large volumes for energy. And then to chill it, to condense it, lots of energy is required. And so there's I think the figure is you need three LNG tankers to get the same amount of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a number of other companies in the room, and I'd love to hear from any of them who'd like to just raise their hand about what they're working on, what policies they're worried about. So I have Alessandra first.
Thank you.
Microphone's coming, so.
Wanted to just pick up on the storage thing that was commented, because in reality, you can actually, depending on the geology...
Why don't you introduce yourself first so that everyone knows who you are?
Hi, it's Alessandra Pasini. I'm co-founder and president of Zhero. Zhero is a new green energy development company. We develop greenfield, large-scale renewable and hydrogen-related projects in the US and Europe and Africa. So on the storage, what I wanted to say is that you can actually store, depending on the geological conformation, underground in existing depleted reservoir. This is something that should be exploited, because of course you can have salt cavern formation, particularly in the US, which are very suitable. But in other places you can do that, and that can actually enhance massively the issue of how you transport hydrogen, how you deal with hydrogen in combination with intermittency in some cases of renewable.
Has it been done?
Yes. It depends on the geology.
No, I understand.
But it has been done, yes.
Yeah.
And it's also a function of the characteristic of the fields and
It's the
levels.
most conventional way to do it.
But you can do it. So
Yeah.
there is no engineering barriers to that.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you talk about policy, I think the reaction from Europe to the IRA, to me, is going to be an important enabler for more or less in 2023. We hear about the CBAM and contract for difference. Clearly, that can be a different way of delivering the same result. Yeah. But as Meg was outlining, if you start putting a little or large barriers like hourly interruption, you actually are not going to enable the scale up. The other thing that will be important is the evolution of how you account for project in decarbonization, so reduction of emission. Some of the projects that Zhero is working on are on subsea cables to export electrons from places where it's very convenient and competitive to produce renewable into where demand is. Right. And yes, it is true that you need more infrastructure in some cases, but if you overlay the decarbonization effort that in some countries is taking place, whether it's coal, whether it's CCGT, you do have in some areas infrastructure that will be left a little bit empty, and large-scale production can quickly fill this gap without the need of redundancy on the grid, and actually immediately deriving the benefit in terms of decarbonization.
Anna has, we have a lot of questions, but Anna has a question as well.
I mean, I will make a comment on storage of hydrogen. Theoretically, it's doable. And I'm speaking from Enagas. We do that. As you know, Spain, we have gas from Algeria through pipeline, and also a big fleet. We were the first in Europe to have a big fleet of LNG land terminals. It's true, but you know what, in real terms, the volatility, the problem, I mean, the complexity of hydrogen, I think makes that we cannot just say that storage in underground, in old, just pockets, it's complicated. So I think that we need to bet on other solutions. And now, my question. I was told, and I was discussing a concrete project. In Europe, in Europe it's slow. We have bet on hydrogen, but it's slow to get a market signal. How do we send in Europe, with all the complexities of regulation, of just precautionary measures, of all that, how, in your opinion, I mean, you are speaking from other places in the world where probably you put more your axe where your mouth is. In Europe, we have to bridge this gap. How do you send a market signal? How in the European context?
With the microphone. Who wants to take that up here? Who you want to? Meg?
Well, there is an enormous market signal sent on the supply side, right, and in the U.S. to incentivize supply to happen. On the demand side, so that's a huge market signal. On the demand side, Europe is saying, please send greener and greener sources of electricity or sources of energy, and so there are demand side incentives. Send that. And I think there's one piece missing in the middle is what are the balance sheets that are going to guarantee on a long-term basis either contracts or billions of dollars for cost of construction. And for that, this is where we decided to make e-fuels from the hydrogen, was to bridge that big gap. Because there's already a massive market for gasoline, shipping fuel, aviation fuel. If we can serve that market in a decarbonized way, then we get the hydrogen infrastructure starting to get built, because there's a ready market there with people willing to commit on a long-term basis, either to the capital or to the contracts, so that the financing capital markets can commit to the capital. And so I think that's a really, really important distinction, is what can be done fast and now with markets that are there, so that the infrastructure can get built while the hydrogen market starts to build.
Got it. Shuayb?
So building off of Meg's response, Anna, the way I understand your question is, you asked what can policy do to send a market signal that will catalyze this industry. My answer would always be, it's not about policy. Policy should not be, I feel, maybe this is a bias that I have working in industry. Maybe it's a bias actually working in government and seeing how slow government is. We shouldn't be relying on government to do this. There are so many cases around the world of industries coming together, matching themselves to generate strong signals and generate investment for green hydrogen. The best case in Europe is H2GS, which I'm sure you know of. H2GS, for those of you who don't know, founded by Henrik Henriksen, former CEO of Scania, if I'm not mistaken. He wanted to generate green steel. The way he did that, and one of the ingredients for setting up a successful hydrogen ecosystem, is he started not upstream trying to figure out where he's going to get the power from, but going downstream, and going all the way downstream. He signed value chain alliances and contracts with Mercedes, with a whole bunch of different automotive companies and others who were bought into the idea, who signed contracts, and then used that to go and generate funding. And this was before he had a plant on the ground. This is when my senior partner likes to say all he had was a PowerPoint presentation. And off his PowerPoint presentation, he generated hundreds of millions of dollars, and they've just raised $3.5 billion in equity and debt for their plant. The answer is we're so focused on the challenges upstream. To generate strong market signals, you have to go downstream. The work that we've done, we've sized the green steel market, and we estimate it at being high single digits at the moment, growing to double digits and higher double digits in billions of dollars by 2030. It's a huge market. We've spoken to some of the largest steel procurers in the world who have directly told us that they would happily pay a 20% premium on the cost of steel for a 20% reduction in steel emissions. 20% reduction is nothing. You can achieve a 20% reduction with just a few process efficiencies. You can achieve a 20% reduction just by switching your electricity out. You don't have to do anything major. But what they're telling us is that steel demand is there. It's there across a whole range of different industries. The challenge that we have, and this is speaking directly to both of your comments, Anna and Meg, is no one is connecting the ecosystem together. And you don't need government necessarily to do that. You just need to think holistically. That's the answer.
So we have like 4 minutes left, and we don't want to be late to Qadri Simpson. So we have a couple questions in the audience. I'd like to take them simultaneously, back to back. So we have one here, right here, and are there any others? I'm going to just so everyone has a microphone, and you can make it quick. We'll get it back
I'm
here, don't worry.
Fred Krupp with the Environmental Defense Fund. In terms of policy challenges in 2023, would you agree that figuring out how to make sure hydrogen doesn't leak, since it is a very, very powerful indirect greenhouse gas, is one? The storing it underground, I'm glad you mentioned the complexities of that, because even storing CO2, there's only certain formations that are leak-free. I don't know that you've given enough attention to leakage here. Wouldn't you agree that's a big problem, given how powerful a greenhouse gas, indirectly, hydrogen is? It eats away the hydroxyl radical, which is what accounts for the relatively short half-life of methane. Methane leaks we got after building the infrastructure. We're still nowhere close to solving it. Don't you think we need to have policy to contain hydrogen leaks before we build the infrastructure?
Fred, that's a great question, particularly because hydrogen is a much smaller molecule than methane. Let's take this.
Actually, the smallest.
Yeah. Yes. It is. We'll do another question back to back, and then we'll let everybody answer.
It was just a reflection from me, actually. But maybe.
Go for it. Go for it. Make it quick.
No, definitely can.
Is that?
I don't think it's. Oh yeah, it's working now. So I'm a senior partner at Xynteo, and we discuss policy a lot. So I just wanted to share some personal experience, because I spent more than a decade in Europe designing all these policies. And I just wanted to build on what Shuayb said about the time it takes between government-led approaches and private-led approaches. I think I was working on a couple of things. For European Commission, I did global best practice analysis for them to assess Europe versus other countries quite a while ago. European Commission, Europe in general, was the best practice for regulation, for frameworks, for everything, but unfortunately not for deployment. So I think in Europe we're doing a really good job designing the best policy frameworks and regulation out there in the world. That's definitely the best practice. But then you look at the deployment, typically other regions just make a decision quickly and then implement. One example also is I actually ended up designing UK's initial industrial decarbonization strategy and policy. I think that was 6 years ago or 5 years ago. And H2 Green Steel was founded last year. So in the UK, we're still waiting for our first big multi-billion decarbonization projects to happen, whereas H2 Green Steel was announced last year, and now they raised 3.5 billion euro debt already. So I think government has a really critical role to play, but I think industry can lead this and at least accelerate the transformation.
That's a fantastic point. I do want to make sure somebody can talk to Fred's point, because I think it's really important. Anybody, any thoughts? Okay, Hussein.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fully agreed. Coming from oil and gas background, change it now to CO2 capture, storage remain a challenge and is still a challenge. And I don't think the hydrogen will be different. Before I forget, I want to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation where this guy made a lot of $1 million. On your comment, I think all of us won that, that presentation.
For a Porsche, okay.
Spain actually ahead of the rest of Europe when it comes to receiving LNG, but you don't have the network to the rest of Europe. So back to your question about signal, actually, signal to Europe, there is MOU.
Please convince Paris. That's the answer. Convince Paris.
No, but President Macron said he is not going to. Yeah.
Of course.
I would like to.
Meg, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I would
Meg,
like.
jump in, and I want to hear from Joe as well on this
Yes, sure.
hydrogen leakage.
I would like to observe that the best stabilizer of hydrogen is carbon, and that is why it is that way naturally in the earth as hydrocarbons. And so we can recycle the CO2 that's in the atmosphere by attaching it to hydrogen and making e-fuels that's already able to be used by existing infrastructure.
Perfect.
Meg, thank you. Joe.
Yeah, with regards to safety issues, again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, but I would say that I think one of the most important things is to recognize that this is a frontier technology, and we do need to be doing. We need to be adequately funding basic research into these matters, so that we don't go down dead ends. And the expression "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." I think we do need to get ahead of these issues and just look into them and fund them appropriately.
Joe, thank you. Great way to end. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our great panelists. Thank you for coming to the Global Energy Forum, and head over to Kadri Simpson.